joining us. Today we have several topics. First off, we want to talk about the inflammation theory as described by Brad Pilon. You can go to inflammationtheory.com and check out basically a PowerPoint presentation with his narration and voiceover. And anyway, nuts and bolts of that is that acute inflammation is the signal for, among other things, muscle growth. And while chronic inflammation can be a dampening, if you will, for those signals, even if you have those stimulus signals applied for muscle growth, if you have chronic inflammation, that can dampen that signal. Any comments you have about that? Any take home?
Well, one thing that I found interesting when I went through it is this leads me to then question, okay, so some people definitely will recover faster from exercise than other people, and that's part of it. So that may give you an indication, and I don't know how that would be measured. I don't know exactly what metrics you would look at, but inflammation may be, some people are less susceptible to it, the chronic version of it, and maybe that leads to the fact that, for instance, I can work out 5 days a week and be fine. If other people worked out 5 days a week the way I do, it would just trash them. And that's nothing but a genetic hand that I was dealt. That's nothing, that's not good on me or anything else. It's just the way it is. So, whether that, in a practical sense, whether that's something to look at, it is interesting to consider. It's interesting to look at.
It reminds me of perhaps in line with a good hormonal hand in the late teens, early 20s, those times when individuals who are looking for hypertrophy tend to grow best. They also have the least amount of responsibility, so they have the least amount of chronic stress.
Sure.
So and this might also be if you go back and watch Pumping Iron, there's a whole lot of like Frank Zane and Arnold Schwarzenegger hanging out on the beach.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Throwing around the football, or gosh, old-time bodybuilders, probably. Or Arthur Judd's experiments with when he'd pull the bodybuilders and say, I'm going to put a half inch on your arm or whatever.
Yeah.
And the first 5 days of that was them relaxing on the beach.
Sure, yeah.
It was sleeping, eating, and generally not stressing and assumedly, if the reduction in inflammation happens as quickly as we can bring it on,
Yep.
then kind of putting the noise down, and then increasing the sound.
Speaking of noise.
Red Hot Chili Peppers, that's my ringtone, folks.
And I guess with chronic inflammation, you were saying you think maybe some people just don't get as susceptible.
Yeah, that's
to
what
that chronic
so when I went through that PowerPoint, well, I heard a podcast. It was Adonis. That is their podcast. Okay.
Yeah.
So I first heard this on a podcast, and Skyler sent me a link to it and I looked at the actual PowerPoint presentation. But it is fascinating. I mean, it's an excellent, good get on Brad's part for bringing that up. I mean, it's a fantastic take on things. And yeah, I think there's, maybe it comes down to personality types too. Maybe you can see a quick recovery type person just in their normal personality. I don't know. Maybe because I'm cuckoo all the and the other time when I'm in the gym, I don't know.
Well,
seriously, I don't know.
But Lon McDonald talks about this, like people who tend to be just these super high-strung type A's. You can almost hear them typing through their keyboard. I need to get huge, and I need they're just and they're probably stressing themselves out of gains. And tangential to that, I have a client who talking about inflammation. There's a great documentary that National Geographic did on stress, following neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky, who wrote Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and Monkey Love. And in studying monkeys, he figured out how stress affects them in a variety of ways. And you look at the alpha, and monkeys in captivity being fed the same diet. The alphas, they experience more pleasure, more dopamine expressed when they eat. They have normal fat storage patterns. Their hair's all there. You go down to a subordinate 3 or 4 rungs down. They have heart attack fat, as we call it. They don't express dopamine they don't experience pleasure, they have their hair falling out. And the best part is when you look at their arteries are clogged. And there's nothing else that can be attributed to it other than the inflammation. And I bring this all up, again, because it's not like the alpha monkeys are getting wheatgrass and the subordinate monkeys are getting ground chuck. I mean, this is just not how it works. And yet, if you follow the theory that fat drives cholesterol, drives heart disease, then boy, that must be the reason. They're sneaking the subordinates lard, but they're not. So I had a client come to me and ask me about possibly this being a trial in which he would be getting some sort of interleukin beta blocker because he had previously had a heart attack. And now interleukin 6 is one of the inflammatory markers that Brad talks about in this. So this is more than just bodybuilding and sort of muscle growth. It holds for all aspects of your health as well. The more you can reduce the chronic inflammation, the better your results.
For a lot of things, yeah. I mean, they're starting to show, and this is his theory, but they are showing that and it's a good distinguishing chronic inflammation, acute inflammation. One is good, and one is not good for a host of health reasons, I guess. And Brad also one of the many that discusses intermittent fasting as an approach to dietary intake. Basically periods of fasting followed by periods of eating. There are different hourly, daily schedules. Some is a little more loosey-goosey, and some is, hey, it's this and this and this, and follow this pattern. It's a broad topic. I know there's a lot of people out there, but maybe one question to both of you is, what is the caloric restriction, or ultimate caloric restriction, if you will, if you compare it over time? How important is that component of it, maybe versus the type of food and the hours you're fasting versus the hours you're eating? I mean, so.
Wow, wish we knew.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, again, like anything in health and fitness, there's a lot of moving pieces and parts to this thing, and to try to isolate one is kind of a fool's errand with everything else circulating around.
Yeah, because you increase the fasting time. Well, you can say, it was the increased fasting time, but you're also dollars to donuts. You're going to be probably eating less calories because you've restricted your window. And very few people can. I can remember when I first started intermittent fasting as the Warrior Diet, which was written years ago by Ori Hofmeckler, and he's this Israeli former special forces guy, writes for Penthouse among other things. But he would have an underfeeding period, which wasn't total fasting, but it was definitely significant caloric reduction to fasting, 20 hours a day, and then he had a 4-hour window in the evening in which to eat as effectively, whatever you wanted. Of course, there was always a scheme to get you to eat less calories, right? Like carbs were the last thing you ate, and so on and so forth, when you'd already eaten all the protein and fat and vegetables. But trying to put down 2,500 calories of good food, not crap, in 4 hours, I was sweating like an obese man at a buffet. I mean, it was just putting down the thermic effect of food, the stoking of the metabolic fire BS. You eat 2,500 calories in under 2 hours, you will be sweating because that is going to race to the roof. And it became a chore to eat that much in that amount of time. So there's a moving piece right there. Just n equals 1, but some people put it down. I found that was too difficult, and I ended up losing weight even though I was trying to eat above maintenance level calories, or as close to it as possible.
The way I attack it is the way many people in the paleo community attack it is I just eat when I'm hungry, which happens to then push my eating window into usually, and I always say usually, or for the most part, into probably about a 6-hour window in the evening. Now I may, depending on what I did the day before, or just how I feel in the morning, I may eat a little bit. For instance, today I had a little bit of leftover barbecue and some sauerkraut, and I probably won't eat again, and I had that earlier today, and I probably won't eat again until I get home tonight.
Okay, so yeah, you wouldn't eat until, basically you're hungry. You're, going by your gut, if you will, a little bit more. And maybe there are people that don't have that. I find it interesting that there are people, the patterns of eating for a lot of obese people, not across the board, but a lot of them, is a pattern of not much in the front end of the day and then a lot at the end of the day. Not all unlike, you know, a lot of these patterns, if you will, drawn out from people promoting intermittent fasting. So how do you address that? You know, a lot of people think, well, kind of the sumo wrestler thing, oh, well, you know, that's a sumo wrestler diet or whatever, and they're just there to gain weight. So how do you address that?
Sure. Well, there's a correlation causation, because a lot of times they get on these studies and they'll look at the way obese people eat, and by the time they get to them, they find that obese people are skipping breakfast in an attempt to lose weight, so they confuse the two. But it does become caloric type, and it does become blood sugar driven eating versus actual hunger driven eating. Darden touched on this years ago, how people would sometimes confuse thirst for hunger. And what we're saying is beyond that, is that if you're eating real foods, not really high glycemic garbage, then it's a true hunger. It's not I'm ravenous because my blood sugar has dipped ever so slightly. Your body has become very efficient at actually keeping blood sugar stable with all the liver glycogen, rather than having this external source of spiking blood sugar because of your diet and then crashing in blood sugar. You remain reasonably stable up until you actually get hungry for food. Now, that's something that's also driven by the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and just practicing and doing it on a more regular basis improves that. But it's also, you know, like I said, the type of food. I mean, my wife, she works in education, and she talked about at her last school about how there was a person who would always worry why they were fat, but they always come back at lunch with like Sonic and a 48-ounce Coke or whatever, or Slurpee or smoothie, or their milkshakes and fries and tots, and then go out again 2 hours later and get the same thing at Sonic. So, you know, and people sort of will look at a steak and they'll say, oh, you know, that's so horrible for you, but it's incredibly satiating, and if you get yourself, say, an 8-ounce ribeye, which is pretty small for a ribeye, but use it as an example, you're not going over 400 calories with that. You're eating it pretty slowly, and you're generally satisfied. You don't go, yeah, let me get another, or another ribeye. You know, you're finished after you have it, but that's not how people work with other calories generally. Not everybody, because people got fat on protein and
so
fat.
they're obviously, and with the rats, they seem to see, you know, hone in on it probably has something to do with the caloric restriction, but there's probably also a large component to the types of calories, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Rats are, sort of they're omnivores because they're scavengers, but that's not an optimal diet. I always look at mice and rat studies, and I go, feeding these things ice cream, and they wouldn't be eating ice cream naturally. Now, I'm not making a naturalistic fallacy. I'm just saying that, if you feed, as we're seeing you feed this enormous fructose load to humans, that it, just beats the dog path straight to the fat cells, because you're not generally going to see that much in nature. It's not something you have exposure to.
Yeah. Well, and Keith kind of touched on maybe, if we're talking about a take-home or a recommendation, that there might be a little bit of an element to personality, or even schedule. I'll take, our schedule, for example. I mean, slammed in the morning, but then, freeze up later in the day. That's just when you're going to eat. So, I mean, maybe touching in a little bit more on the personality for the workouts as well. This autoregulation, wanted to compare, contrast, if you will, autoregulation workouts versus linear periodization. There is a study we can reference here that the conclusions were that the autoregulated participants, and these were athletes, mind you, college-age athletes. What's new? It's a lot of the study population.
They're cheap.
Yeah, but found that the auto-regulated workouts, more in a, let's call it a powerlifting-ish type of setting. Their 1 RM bench press and their squat. And so I don't remember what all they measured, but anyway, they improved more than the linear periodization. So I guess, Keith, what do you make of that? How do you apply that not only with your own workouts, but how do you teach that?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that once again science has caught up with the strength and conditioning community, who has used autoregulation for a long period of time. We've known it has worked since way back when, but it's good to see a scientific study come out that actually proves that yes, it does work. To contrast the use of autoregulation with linear periodization, and I'll kind of back up and say that this is a perfect example of when Art Devaney talks about the old Soviet command and control type thing. Anybody, when they start a resistance training program, can use a basic linear periodization. That is to say, just using a squat, for example. Every time that I go into the squat rack, I'm going to throw on another 2%, another 5 pounds, another 2.5 pounds, whatever that may be. And that works brilliantly for a period of time. And then it comes to a halt. It has to come to a halt. I mean, just realistically, you're not going to keep gaining over and over and over and over. Now, what to do about that? So, if you have somebody that's fairly progressed into their resistance training lifespan, so what happens is people will get up to a certain peak, and then they will start wigging out whenever they can't hit what their projected weight ought to be. Cortisol, now we've got the whole stress thing kicking in. Now we've got the whole stress, the whole wigging out. I've seen people, and I'm like, and I have done it myself way long ago when I was younger, thinking, actually modifying my outside life because I've got a big deadlift or squat day coming up, and by God, I'm going to hit what I projected I need to hit today. Okay, so and it's just, it's crazy. It's crazy whenever you're not an athlete doing that, but it's even crazier when you are an athlete trying to do that, because now trying to hit these weight room numbers is affecting your performance on the field. And now your performance on the field, now you're being held back because you're thinking, you know, I've got a big squat day coming up, and I want to hit some records here. Otherwise, I feel like a failure.
Hell, it goes against your social performance too. Not
Yeah.
tonight, baby. I got a deadlift tomorrow.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. So how to get around that? So the way around that is autoregulation. And real quick, what we're doing is we're saying when the trainee comes through the door, we are going to have him perform at his best in this particular exercise with what he's presenting today. And we're not going to worry about his outside training. We're not going to worry about maybe he had a hard practice yesterday. None of that. We're not going to worry about if he argued with his girlfriend, if he's got other stresses, if he's in the middle of finals. All these things contribute to overall stress, which then will somehow rock the boat one way or another on the performance on the lift. So, the only thing that the athlete needs to come in the door with, or just any other trainee needs to come in the door with, is intensity. If you give me intensity on this day, what your maximum intensity, we can make this work. So, what we do is we ballpark a weight for a repetition range in a particular exercise. Let's just use squat for an example. So let's say I want to hit a repetition range in the 6 repetition range area. I know a ballpark for this trainee or for myself about what my 6 rep max is. Now going back from that, we'll do what essentially, without getting into the nuts and bolts of it, what essentially winds up being 2 warm-up sets and finish with 2 blow and go sets. What we'll do is we'll build up 2 build-up sets, then we'll put on what we figure to be the 6 rep maximum, and we'll blow and go. You give me as many reps as you can with this weight. If you hit 6, fantastic. If not, don't worry about it. We'll adjust for it the next rep. If you go way beyond, kudos to you. Excellent. The final set, we adjust according to what you did on the 3rd set. We'll either go up in weight, stay the same, or we may even decrease a little bit. We do that, and we go on, and this is how this study was conducted, and they found out these athletes, lo and behold, that did it this way, performed, when they were tested later, much better than the athletes who were kind of forced into that, come in today, it's going to be 350 for 6 reps. Now here comes all the mental stress. Oh God, I get it. You know, what if I only get 5 reps? Or, you know, so, and the results of the study were that these kids that went through the autoregulation did much better than the kids that were on the linear periodization, And it's kind of a no-brainer to us that have been doing this for a while, but it's good to see it in the study.
Well, the thing is that they've managed to systematize it a little bit in a way that previously it was sort of like old timers who are really in touch with their body and they can almost lift an empty bar and go, I've got it today or I don't got it.
Sure, yeah.
And,
Yep,
and now, so this gives sort of a metric, and there's a power lifter by the name of Mike Tusher, I'm probably butchering his name, it ends in E-R-E-R, the Tusher, but he came up with what in his manual, the Reactive Training Systems manual, sort of, how do you feel today? Like actually asking this question, trying to sort of saying, well, if you just completed your set of 8 repetitions, and you honestly felt like you had another rep in the tank, your perceived, your rate of perceived effort or perceived exertion would be a 9, right? Because you did have 1 in the tank, and so then that's going to influence how you're going to adjust your workout the next time. So it's kind of an off the back end adjustment, and you can then combine that with kind of a ramping protocol. But he also then went as far as to then you look at some suggestions that some say, well, test a broad jump to see how your nervous system is, and if you establish a baseline and you can jump further than that today, then you might want to go for it because you're testing on something better. There's actually a computer tap test. You wake up in the morning, you do a tap test on a space bar, and your reactivity with that. Your resting heart rate is sort of a classic. How are you recovered? Or if you wake up in the morning, your resting heart rate is 6 to 10 beats higher than it would be in the same position at the same time under the same circumstances. Well, you probably don't want to work as hard today if you're going to work out. And then it got me thinking about high-intensity training individuals who might use time under load. How do you, if you're going to go, if you have the personality that you're going to go 1 set to fatigue, and you're using time under load as a metric, well, how do you do that? Well, if you're using a range, you can kind of play this by ear. And what I mean is if you're not counting reps, which are effectively big real estate, right? Houses aren't measured in miles, and so there's a lot of seconds, even in repetitions, especially as the set goes on and they start getting a little more grindy. Well, if you set yourself kind of a range, almost, Doug McGuff talked about signature time under load, in which everybody's muscles are made up of a certain grouping of fiber types, and each fiber type has a certain staying power due to the endurance and strength characteristics of each fiber type. So it could be argued that each muscle group tends to have a certain staying power. This would be fiber typing, and it's done in multiple ways. But if you tend to fatigue on an exercise around a minute and 15 seconds, a leg press or some sort of pressing movement, then that gives you a working range, in my case, an N=1, that I did a leg press for a period of time where I would fatigue right around a minute and 42 seconds. Of course, this is within weight ranges as well. If you're really, really heavy and you're going for the hypertrophy, you want around the minute time if you're time under load testing. But in this instance, I was fatiguing right around 142 within 8 seconds in either direction. But it clustered around this time. So if I consistently was hitting at the top of that time under load range, or blow it out of the water one day, then it was time to take the weight up. But if I was fatiguing at the low end, I might not take the weight up. But there are times where you might fatigue at the low end, but your rate of perceived exertion is still not a 10. Right? I mean, we've all had that happen where we're working on something and we don't get it, but we don't feel like we broke our teeth not getting it. Yep. It's a strange, you might not have had a lot of energy, or your energy might have felt fine, but your performance was low. And so you might have to take the weight up the next time, even if you didn't get exactly where you were. So this is an external measure and an internal survey. So that when you're talking about autoregulation, how do you apply it to more than just rep schemes? There's a thought. Yep. So.
And it works great just for your average trainee.
Sure.
Because, the average trainee has stresses too. Office stresses, traffic stresses, the same stresses that add up. And this is a fantastic way to compensate for those and not worry about it. And it doesn't take a whole lot of planning. And that's one thing when you were talking about the different stress tests, basically the heart rate, morning heart rate, tap test, broad jump. So this is a way, this is just a real nuts and bolts, easy way. I'm going to deadlift today. I'm going to come in. I know about, I want to hit the 6 rep range today. I'm going to come in. Here we go. Bam. And I hit the ground running. There's not a whole lot of thinking about it. I can just hit the ground running and go, give a max effort, and be happy with what I've got at the other end. Then you can see your progress will dip and wane, you know, peaks and valleys, but kind of looking at the 100-year trend of the stock market, you want to see the, you know, a good plane going up. So, and it's a fantastic system. It's easy, and it,
and you know, we automatically
No
have
stress.
that built in,
Yeah.
not to plug, but we automatically do
It
have
made me
that
think of
built
that too,
into the CZT stuff, because there are times, if you're going to standardize repetitions, let's say, and you've standardized the time in which the motor is going to move the movement arm, you can come in and you're going to learn real quick if you're either going to break your record, or you're going to beat what you did last time, or you're going to fall short, and then the machine will then adjust and say, okay, well, next time you come in, here's going to be your force goal, and it's going to be what you did last time.
Yeah.
So it's always if you blow it out of the water, then you're going to try and reach for that next time. And so we should
it automatically
Yeah.
builds it in, because it's always going back to your last performance, which is a good way to judge. I mean, like you said, you want the general trend to go up, but it's okay. Type A's out there that, you know, it might go down one day, and then you're going to get it the next time. And of course, that's one of the things that, I mean, routinely we ask people when they walk in the door is, you know, how are you feeling today? And, you know, trying to get a feel for what kind of stresses are they going through, if they get a good night's sleep, you know, things like that, because that's going to determine, you know, how well they perform that day.
Yeah.
And another thing with, for instance, I'll just talk about myself. Summer is here in the ATX. I mean, it's pretty much summertime now, which means I move out of the gym and out on the fixed speed bike and doing a lot of running, which means my deadlifts and squats during the summer just kind of trend down. You can't help but to do otherwise. I mean, you're just beating the hell out of your legs, and you can't really keep up with the deadlift and squat. Autoregulation, I come in, I do what I can do. And it's just kind of cool to look back over my training logs and see that dip and rise with the seasons. And autoregulation has been there with me all the way, and that's the way I do it. It's real easy to keep up with.
And you mentioned the old timers and, you know, knowing your body. I mean, I guess the question is, can you teach autoregulation, or is it something that's just intuitive? You got it.
No, it's easily taught.
Yeah.
Easily taught, yeah.
That was the parameters. I mean, and that was the point I was kind of making.
Yeah,
that
it's easily
you
taught.
once you had this, you know, it's loose parameters, but it gives you a guidepost to say, well, yeah, if you can't hit your 6-rep max, take the weight down and do more reps. I mean, you know.
Yeah. Or like you said, it's kind of in a way built into the software here that, you know, you perform at this level and then it adjusts, and now you're trying to beat that level.
Actually, it was something that my wife noticed, is that last Saturday we went kayaking down on Ladybird Lake, and I got at one point where I was just like, let's see how fast we can go.
Sure, of course.
I'm built for this, and I've never done it. And Sarah thought like weight was coming off, you know. And I come in the next day and I'm going to do CZT row, and I'm thinking, man, I just rode yesterday, it's going to be crap.
Yeah.
And she points out that was the only one you actually bested.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
so
how things work sometimes.
so that's how it works sometimes. I mean, I expect to be really tired, and the only one I did better than I did the previous workout was rowing. And so when it's kind of taken you with that force gauge there telling you how it is, you know, it's how you might think you're going to do.
Yep.
You actually blow it out of the water.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's about all for this time, and thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have some take-home points, and we'll see you next time.